We were just talking about. That is a press conference attended by Julian Assange, speaking about the revelations that they've had on their whistleblower website by the name of Wikileaks. Let's see what those men have to say.
The question you're probably asking is, well, what now? And I'm going to tell you about some of the legal action that will follow here in the UK. And it'd be wrong to assume that as these are US logs, this has nothing to do with the UK. Public interest lawyers are presently acting for many Iraqi civilians who've been killed or tortured by UK forces. Some have been killed by indiscriminate attacks on civilians or the unjustified use of lethal force. Others have been killed in custody with UK forces. No one knows how many Iraqis lost their lives whilst held in British detention facilities. The most notable of those, of course, is Baha Musa, and we now await the inquiry's report into his death due in early 2011. The Iraq war logs add hugely to the evidence in the public domain as to the effect of the invasion and subsequent occupation of Iraq by coalition forces, including the UK. What can be said about the logs comes under three headings. All three areas are, or will soon be, the subject of legal action here in the UK. The first is that of unlawful killings of civilians, or indiscriminate attacks upon them, or the unjustified use of lethal force against them. It may never be known how many Iraqis died, but we now know from the important work of Iraq Body Count that the previously known number of deaths, 107,369, is likely to have increased by around a staggering 15,000. Some of these deaths will be in circumstances where the UK had a very clear legal responsibility. This may be because the Iraqis died whilst under the effective control of UK forces, under arrest in vehicles, helicopters or detention facilities. These deaths will all fall within the jurisdiction of the European Convention on Human Rights if the judgment of the Grand Chamber in the Al-Skyni case, which is due early in 2011, asserts, as we expect, that once UK forces have authority and control over Iraqis, there is jurisdiction for the purposes of the European Convention. But others will not be covered by the European Convention on Human Rights. For example, public interest lawyers was a case where a UK tank stopped and in broad daylight a rifleman aimed, shot and killed an 8-year-old girl playing in her yellow dress in a Basra street. There are many other cases like that, and the logs add to the number of cases that will not be within the jurisdiction of the European Convention. But we will argue in a case shortly that the common law here in the UK provides the same remedy as the European Convention, namely that there must now be a judicial inquiry into the legality of all of these deaths. If unjustified or unlawful force has been used, prosecutions of all those responsible must follow. So we're bringing forward a new case seeking accountability for all unlawful deaths, and we argue that there must be a judicial inquiry to fully investigate UK responsibility for civilian deaths in Iraq. The second area is the huge number of logs that detail horrendous torture and abuse of Iraqis by either the Iraqi National Guard or the Iraqi Police Service. The US and the UK appear to have adopted a fragmented order that required them to take no action whatsoever once they'd established that this torture and ill treatment was the responsibility of Iraqis. Now, this is completely contrary to international law. It's well known that there's an absolute prohibition on torture. It may never be used. Accordingly, all states owe a duty to each other to cooperate together to stamp it out and to deal with incidents of torture, so that torturers know beforehand that they will be found out and they will be prosecuted for their war crimes. US and UK forces cannot turn a blind eye on the basis it wasn't their soldiers doing the torturing, and that's what's happened and is revealed in these logs. Both states have the clearest of international obligations to take definite and effective action to stop the torture by the Iraqis. That they did not makes them complicit. Pillar bring forward a second case seeking accountability for the UK's failure to act in these circumstances. The third area concerns the huge and growing body of evidence about killings, ill treatment and torture of Iraqis whilst in UK custody. There appear to be many cases other than that of Baha Musa where Iraqis died in UK custody and were then certified as dying from natural causes. None of these deaths have been investigated. Many of these Iraqis were hooded and abused, and my law firm does not accept the Ministry of Defence's explanation that each and every one of these deaths has an innocent explanation. Additionally, there are hundreds of Iraqis now complaining of ill treatment and torture, often as a result of coercive interrogation techniques by UK interrogators within secret facilities run by the Joint Forward Interrogation Team. Insofar as the logs add to this body of evidence, they will help us gain a single inquiry into the UK's detention policy and practice in south-east Iraq. A Court of Appeal and High Court judge sitting together will hear a case about all of these incidents on the 5th to the 9th of November 2010.
Thanks very much. We're going to open up very quickly now for questions from the audience, but we have a surprise sort of announcement, an unusual announcement, because we have an unusual addition to the speakers this morning. We have here in the front row probably the most famous whistleblower in modern American history, Daniel Ellsberg, author of the Pentagon Papers, and we'll hear from him shortly. I would request, though, during the questions, that all the questioners understand that the speakers are pleased to answer any and all questions concerning the release of the documents, the analysis of the data, and conclusions and the work that's been done. But I think I'd like, if I may, just to open the questions by asking Daniel Ellsberg, what's your reaction to this kind of release of material? It's quite different than the one that you did yourself.
Well, it's different and it's the same in many ways, just as the war that we're facing right now, the one in Afghanistan, which I call Vietnamistan, has really more fundamental similarities than it has differences. I've been asked here to make a couple of comments rather than questions to you right away. I'll just say that a couple of us here came over the ocean last night for the opportunity to stand with Julian Assange and the rest of you here in a circumstance that really I've been waiting to see for 40 years. And that's a number is not drawn out of the air. That's a precise figure. Judy Ehrlich, next to me, just co-directed a film called The Most Dangerous Man in America. So she's working now on a film, or hopes to do a film, on Julian Assange and his sources. And I haven't talked to her what the title would be, but it seems inevitable, The Most Dangerous Man in the World. Now, how do you get to be the most dangerous man in the world? Well, first, empirically, if one country, our country in this case, is pursuing for prosecution that person, regards him as dangerous over 3 continents at this point, in Australia and Britain and America. The threat that is made by the Pentagon, as we read over the last few days, of warning newsmen to stand away from this material, to refuse to receive it, and if they do receive it, to return it, seems absurd on its face. We're not dealing with the 7,000 pieces of paper, top secret pieces of paper that comprise the Pentagon paper. The Pentagon did make a demand to the New York Times that they return that pile of paper to the Pentagon. The Times refused, and until, in fact, never did return it, and refused to stop the presses until that court order came down. But with cyber material, it's all over the world right now, and in several papers right now, the demand seems absurd. I understand the reason for those words, because they echo the words first used against me, the legal words of 18 U.S.C. 793 paragraphs D and E, which for the first time used the so-called Espionage Act as if it were the kind of official secrets act that you have in Britain, which simply criminalizes the release of any classified material to any unauthorized person. We don't have such a law. And the irony now is that President Obama, in making these clear threats of applying this law to anybody who deals with this information, including not only the journalists, but The words apply to the people who read it and don't return it to the proper authorities, actually. President Obama's threats are not entirely without credibility here because he has started as many prosecutions for leaks as all previous presidents put together. It's a small number. It's 3. The last one is Bradley Manning. It's small because we don't have an Official Secrets Act. And prior to Bush and Obama, presidents took it for granted that any application of the Espionage Act was likely to be overthrown as unconstitutional in our First Amendment by the Supreme Court. But now facing a different Supreme Court, and after 9/11, Obama is making a new experiment on this issue, which will really change the relation of the press to sources very radically. As it is, any source, with or without this change in the law, who gave this kind of material, 400,000 pages, documents, 800,000 pages, to Wikileaks, would have to know that they were facing a risk of being where Bradley Manning is right now, in prison, accused of these things. And we don't know, I don't know who the source is. If the president should prove beyond reasonable doubt that it is Bradley Manning, we can give him his unreserved admiration from us and thanks for what he did. But whoever did it, in fact, acted very appropriately in the course of a hopeless, deadly, stalemated war, and which has one characteristic, by the way, in Iraq, which isn't going to come out clearly in these 400,000 pages or in the discussion, and that is that the origins of the war were clearly in the form of lying to the publics of Britain and America, and of carrying on, in the order to carry on a clearly illegal crime against the peace, a war of aggression. So all these civilian casualties are killed in a war of aggression. One has to say also the non-civilian casualties that are reported here are in the role of fighting against foreign occupiers, invaders, and by the standards of the world, the question is raised very much whether their death by the invader is not also to be counted among the murders until they continue. So I want very much to congratulate all of you who are mining this material to learn what we could have learned if it had come out earlier. Oh, yeah, okay. No, you want to do Craig? Yeah. Yes, Craig Murray here is representing a group that was mentioned earlier. Giving the Sam Adams Award for Intelligence Integrity, and we want very much to appreciate him in that guise.
Thank you. I'm here as a former recipient of the Sam Adams Award for Integrity and Intelligence. My name's Craig Murray. I was British Ambassador in Uzbekistan before I made a series of leaks about UK intelligence sources' use of torture. This award has been given to a number of people, including last to Colonel Larry Wilkinson in the UK, to Major Frank Greville, to Catherine Gunn of GCHQ. It's given to people who, in the public interest, leak details of the dark things that governments do. And I'm very happy to present this year's award to Julian Assange.